Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Football, presented by Texas Electricity Ratings. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel, and a lot to talk about today. But before we get into all that, tell us where you're checking in from. Be sure to get your questions in, but definitely tell us where you're checking in from. We love to see that, see where all you guys are watching or tuning in from. And let's start with recruiting, fellas. Coaches obviously out on the road. I know they got a big visit today to go see one of their commits. CJ, what's the latest there?
Yeah, Texas is sending out their A team right now. It looks like it's Steve Sarkisian, Tashard Choice, and Jeff Banks hitting the road, kind of on a national scale. They'll be out in Saraland today, checking in on a quarterback commit, KJ Lacey. They were out yesterday checking on a pair of Texas commits as well, Brandon Brown and Emory Winston. So hard to imagine three guys on this staff right now that you'd like to see more walk into your school than those three. But Texas is really doing a tremendous job hitting their guys that they have in the class right now. We've talked about being able to get started and get rolling in the 25 class. They've done so a little bit earlier this cycle than we've seen in years past, and they're making sure that these guys are feeling the love. They've also stopped by Lance Jackson and Anthony Williams earlier last week as well. So a lot going on. A new offer went out yesterday. Jamie French, the number 12 overall player in the country, a talented playmaking wide receiver. I actually chatted with him a little bit yesterday. Has not visited Texas yet, but he said he absolutely wants to get down to Austin. That's somewhere he wants to visit. He loves how Texas used their wide receivers, and he's a big fan about how Sarkisian airs out the ball in his offense. It's already going to show the evidence of what A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy were able to put on field last year. Obviously helped in the 24 class, landing Ryan Wingo and a trio of talented wide receivers. But moving on to 25, a lot of excitement right there. I also wanted to touch on Jaden Sanders, a 6'2 safety out of Kilgore. Texas is starting to take a little bit of a deeper look here. It looks like he's getting evaluated at cornerback and safety. He's about 6'2", 6'2 and a half. Just earned a Texas Tech offer yesterday, and he's being recruited. He has offers now from Arizona State, Houston, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. So a lot going on. He was at the Texas Junior Day, and it looks like that evaluation will be going a little bit further as well. So we'll see how it goes. But right now, a lot going on the trail, and these coaches are – the miles are just racking up for them.
Yeah, definitely. And then obviously high school recruiting going on. But, Bobby, I know that you're kind of keeping an eye on a certain team up north when it comes to the portal. Can you tell folks about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the best way I could put it is we're on hold right now. I wrote today this morning that it feels like an old Al Pacino movie line that the portal just – I think I'm almost out, and then it keeps dragging me back in. It's like the mafia almost. Texas right now trying to see what's going to happen, basically, with a number of Michigan players. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, those guys legitimately would be of interest to any school in the country. Yesterday, Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle, that's 6'4", 339 pounds, by the way. He would be a true junior out of Merrillville, Indiana. He started following Sark, Texas football, Sadir Mitchell, and Tavondre Sweat on Instagram. Later in the day, though, he took it down, stopped following those accounts. He was also following Dan Lanning, the head coach at Oregon. So we'll see if he actually enters the portal. That's going to be the key, I think, for some of these guys. What happened yesterday that precipitated this movement, whereas before there really had been none, Michigan decided to part ways to some extent with its with its strength and conditioning coach. He did not get the offer he wanted, so he's going with the Los Angeles Chargers and Jim Harbaugh instead. And not only was Kenneth Grant upset, but Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Anaheim Servite, who was a first-team All Big Ten performer, Grant's second team, he actually tweeted a broken heart emoji. Like, this is a guy that was well thought of and was said to be kind of the constitution of the team behind the scenes. Like, if Harbaugh wasn't there, he was actually the strength and conditioning guy was actually the leader of the team. And so I think that all of that is interesting right now. Texas would be very, very interested if that were to take place. We'll see how it goes. I think that the Longhorns would be interested not just in those top 2 defensive linemen for Michigan too, by the way. I mean, they've got 4 or 5 guys that would be good enough to go play at Texas. Maybe not this year, but in the future. So, look, the Michigan roster is loaded at some level. Yes, it's off of last year based on the fact that they're probably going to put 10 to 15 guys in the NFL this offseason. But you can bet that Texas would be very aggressive if given the opportunity.
Yeah, they got some dudes.
Yes, they do. Absolutely. And you can see it, especially up front. I mean, they have some guys in the secondary. Will Johnson is an All-American corner, going to be a top 10 pick. He might be a guy, but the reality of it, CJ and Blake, is they've just got a lot of, just as you would expect. They're one of the most talented, 5 most talented teams. If this were to be happening to Texas people would be preying on them as well. I put it that way, attempting to at least.
And then before we move on to the next thing, Chris McDonald says today would be the last possible day to get a transfer in. The ad drop overrides the rest onto the next portal. Can you touch on that?
True. That's true. Technically, Chris, there can be exceptions in rare circumstances. I would bet it would have to be by the end of this week to get a rare exception in. So I agree with you by the letter of the law, but as we know, there's always a little bit of wiggle room. There's not a ton, though, to Chris's point. I mean, just a little bit. So if something were to happen, bang, bang, they could. Otherwise, they're going to have to wait till the spring. Now, that doesn't mean they can't go ahead and recruit the guys, too, by the way. I mean, so if they do go in the portal, they can recruit the heck out of them. They just couldn't have them enrolled on campus until the spring.
Yeah.
Until after the spring has passed.
Well, a couple of former Longhorns are trying to impress NFL draft scouts right now. We got the Reese's Senior Bowl obviously going on, the East-West Shrine Bowl. CJ, I know you've been keeping up with that. You even got a thread over on TexasFootball.com, with all the updates on that. What are you hearing there? What's impressed you the most, et cetera?
Yeah, a little bit of a mixed bag, really. I was kind of surprised Jordan Whittington was not on the initial roster at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. A little bit of a surprise. He earned that offer, actually, or I guess invitation to the Senior Bowl during a big practice at Texas, and that was kind of a big deal. They paraded it around on social media. He was not on the roster, and Byron Murphy also is not expected to participate due to a report he was dealing with a late season injury and is still kind of nagging him a little bit. So a little bit of something to monitor there. Devondre Sweat this morning did not weigh in at the Senior Bowl. Not a big deal, but that was kind of one of the big question marks is what number is actually on that scale when Devondre Sweat steps on it. The tape doesn't lie, and I expect to see him put on a good week of workouts this upcoming week, but a little bit of a question mark. So the positives, Ryan Watts actually came in at the East-West Shrine Bowl as one of the fastest players on the entire practice sheet. Pretty impressive. I know that was one of the biggest question marks with Ryan Watts. We knew that he could play. He's actually at safety in the bowl game practices as well. So a little bit of a transition, but he's answering some of the questions that he's had so far, and that's with the speed. That's pretty good to see. JT Sanders was actually listed to one of the East-West Shrine Game watch lists as one of the big-time risers potentially in this draft as well. You talked about Kansas City might needing a tight end. That might be somewhere where he ends up squeaking into the late first round. And then Christian Jones got his measurables back from the Senior Bowl as well. 6'5", 318. He came in just a hair under a 7-foot wingspan, so right around 6 feet 11 inches. Pretty good measurables coming in for Christian Jones, a guy that's looking to make a jump into the late rounds. This is a big, important week for him in the one-on-one settings, in the team settings, and obviously I think he just knocked off the measurables from that side of things as well. So pretty positive there.
Did you notice how in that log that you showed just then, CJ, they listed Ryan Watts as a safety?
That is interesting.
They did not put him down as a corner. So even though he ran well, they're still projecting him more as a safety than as a corner. So I think that's kind of what we all expected right? And what we thought he might try to do if he came back to Texas for an extra year. But the NFL, they don't play.
No.
They have to have certain things, period. They don't let you just kind of tip around the edges. They make you go big or go home. Longhorns also played basketball last night, guys, losing in overtime 76-72. Longhorns played well, I thought, guys. I really did. I thought they played well. I think the implementation of Kendall Weaver more and giving him more minutes has helped a little bit on the defensive side of the ball while not taking away too much offense. He's been that kind of mix. Now the question, though, is are they going to be good enough to get into the tournament? Because they won 2 in a row last week against ranked teams. Now they've lost 2 in a row to ranked teams. Granted, Houston ranked number 3 in the country, really good ball team, only lost 2 games all year. But it's starting to get on that. I don't know how to say it. It's a little crazy right now.
Close.
Yeah, it's getting a little too close for comfort. One thing I do want to mention, Ulrich Chomchi, the big man from Cameroon, I think it was. Is that right?
Yep.
He was in for an official visit yesterday. He is at the NBA Academy in Africa. So he is going to be looking at a couple other schools, but Longhorns had him on a visit. That had to be a really good atmosphere for him to visit on, though. I mean, I will say that overtime game that was back and forth like that. We'll see we'll try to get a word on him and see what he's thinking after that game.
Yeah, and I think he actually officially leaves later today. So it is a 2-day official visit. All right, Bobby, before we move on, why don't you tell everybody out there about Texas electricity ratings?
Yeah, for those of y'all still living in Texas and in the major cities with deregulated electricity like Dallas and Houston, you understand that the deregulated electricity market can be confusing. Texas Electricity Ratings is a shopping website that lets you compare prices, read customer reviews, and find a good electricity bill or company that fits your needs. It also filters out a lot of the gimmicky plans on websites like Power to Choose that trick customers into expensive bills. So if you're in the market for a new electricity plan, shop TexasElectricityRatings.com/OTF for all your electricity needs. Hook 'em. That's TexasElectricityRatings.com/OTF for all your electricity needs.
All right. Well, there's plenty of time to get your questions in, so please do so. We'll obviously get to as many as we possibly can. And let's get started with those questions, guys. We'll go back to basketball because we do have a couple of basketball questions. Rob Enfield says, do you think Terry keeps his job if he doesn't make the tournament?
It would have to be a total implosion for him not to keep his job.
Agree.
I mean, look, you don't just give a guy 1 year to decide whether or not he's any good or not. They didn't do that with Steve Sarkisian in 5 and 7. I mean, the year before Tom Herman was 7 and 3, and they didn't fire. So I feel like that's part of it. I do think that they have to get better, and improve over the course of the year. The problem I'm having right now, and CJ, I know we've talked about this off air, is I don't know if they know who their best 5 on the floor at one time are right now. It seems like it, and maybe that goes to the players themselves a little bit and lacking consistency. I can't tell you that this is the 5 I would put out there. I see CJ wrote this here. Go for it, CJ.
Yeah, I was actually pretty encouraged in that second half. I thought in that early on, it looked like Texas was a little bit stale. They were stagnant offensively. Houston obviously has a tremendous defense, but they didn't have any creativity there. Second half, I thought they found some sort of a rhythm. They started going to the inside with Dessou. Weaver's kind of one of those spark plug guys that you don't know what's going to happen. He might jump through the rim. He's an exciting guy that plays within the boundaries of controlled, aggression. It's exciting with him. I liked what they did a lot in the second half, and I thought it was those 5 that really helped progress, Texas in terms of gaining a 6-point lead, fighting back for a 4-point lead, getting into really, I would say, advantageous positions on the scoreboard despite being down by 8 at halftime. I thought there was a clear adjustment there. Texas wanted to go big, obviously had to, in terms of finding the rebounds, which was still an issue. Houston, is the best rebounding team in the country. So that's its own conversation. But you didn't see a lot of Brock Cunningham last night. You didn't see a lot of Onyema as well. I thought Texas and Rodney Terry, to his point, found what was working early in that second half and said, we're going to ride this out. And for the most part, it worked out until, a final late game turnover, which eventually led to overtime and Texas not just having enough juice later on. But I thought you found something that worked. Not moving forward, as every game is getting more and more critical, this is what that lineup needs to look like late in games. Those 5 guys on the floor, Amos, Dessou, Weaver, Mitchell, and Hunter. I thought Texas covered all of its ground offensively, and they still had enough juice defensively to ensure that they could, one, take away opponent's number 1 scoring option with Weaver. They had enough height and size on the interior, with Mitchell being kind of a hybrid big guy, and obviously Dessou kind of shuffling in and out with Shedrick. So that was encouraging to me. I hope that for Texas' sake, it continues into the upcoming Big 12 slate. But that right there is what I was encouraged about the most from last night's game.
That's an awfully small lineup, by the way. I mean, that is guard heavy to the extreme almost, which is interesting because they started off the season almost the polar opposite, trying to play Weaver, a little bit of Weaver, Shedrick, Dessou, that group, trying to go inside out. Now they're trying it the opposite way after some trial and error.
Okay, then this next question, fellas, it's from Tracy Jackson. We'll take one more basketball question, then move on. Tracy says, does this essentially put them in the NIT?
I mean, we still got a lot of games left. And I mean, we were talking about it. The margin for error now is razor thin, but there's still a path. Plus, you could, find lightning in a bottle basically in the Big 12 tournament. So you never know just how that goes. Texas does have a pretty solid net rating, which for the NCAA tournament, they look a lot of those advanced metrics and analytics and statistics that go beyond the win-loss record. You talk about the quad 1, quad 2. I don't think Texas plays a quad 2 team for the remainder of the season. So a lot of opportunities to make the jump into the tournament. Obviously, I think Texas, as we talked about, they don't have much to lose moving forward. They cannot afford to lose very much.
And Christian Kruger says, is it baseball season yet? We're very close. The alumni game and fan appreciation day are both this Saturday. I think autographs start at 10:30, and then the actual game itself at 2:30. And then the following Friday, we're there, baby. Can't wait. So
hey, true question for you, Blake, on baseball. How long until they get into Big 12 play? Like, is it about a month of out of season stuff, and then they get into?
I think so. I remember looking and thinking, man, it starts pretty quick. Yeah, so March 8th they'll open up against Texas Tech and Lubbock. And Texas Tech obviously a top 25 team, top 20 in some publications. So and then they kind of go back to then they host Washington and Air Force, and then back into conference play. So it'll start very quickly. That's crazy. Very crazy. So, all right, let's go to this next one here. And, we talk a lot about recruiting, but we haven't talked about last year's class a lot here lately. Captain Americano says, I watched some film on Aaron Butler and feel like we may be sleeping on him a bit. I don't think he's an instant rotation guy, but I think he could be a key contributor the following year. CJ, what do you think about Butler?
I like Butler a lot. I've been seeing his name a lot in terms of what people might expect to be one of those sleepers from the class. We didn't know a whole lot about him about a week or two leading up to signing day. And, of course, he hops in the fold and signs right away. So and a lot to learn about him. And I thought Texas fans did a good job doing their research because he is a pretty talented player. You see it on the film. He's electric with the ball in his hands. And Sarkisian made it a priority to replace what was Aaron Hampton with a guy who had a similar set of skills and traits with the speed and agility with the ball in his hands. It's going to be a crowded room in that room, even after what we see this year. Does he leapfrog Ryan Niblett and DeAndre Moore? Can he fight for those big time snaps with Ryan Wingo, Jonte Cook? That's kind of the conversation right now. I'd like to see him get his feet wet in special teams a little bit this year, maybe, catching some of those late kicks if Texas is up big, that would be interesting to me. But I do have high hopes for Aaron Butler, but a lot going on right now with that Texas wide receiving room, and I'm excited to see just where it goes from 2024 to 2025.
Okay, guys. And then we have a question here, a couple of questions regarding the spring game. And Sandman23 says, our football spring game is on April the 20th, but the portal opens on April 15th. With that in mind, would it behoove us to move the spring game 1 week earlier to April 13th so we can assess our spring game and assess if we need to attack the portal?
Well, I think by then you certainly know what the weaknesses on your team are going to be. It doesn't take a live action game to tell you that. If anything, you can get them on campus for kind of a fake or a little mock game day to give these kids an idea of what they could expect coming to Texas. So I would actually use that spring game as a benefit to get these guys who entered the portal on campus for a visit right away to let them see an idea of what it's like to play football at Texas during a season game.
Okay, guys. And then we'll do one more question. And we got a special guest joining us. But, Bobby, I'm going to let you take this one from Rob Enfield. Any news on Kenny Baker?
I don't even know if he's been in the office yet. I think he went straight to the road recruiting and getting his stuff to Austin as much as possible. And he had to file paperwork first day of the job to actually go on the road recruiting. So he had to take the NCAA test, et cetera. We'll see how it goes. But we should see him out on the road officially today. They also had to take Brandon Harris off the road to put him on the road as well. So that's part of the process. I did talk to someone in the building earlier this morning, and they're excited about the opportunity they have right now in recruiting overall, not just with Kenny Baker, but the reception that they're getting across the country with Sark out in Georgia. I mean, think about it. Sark's Florida, Georgia, and now Alabama this morning. And that's in the last 2 days. They are getting really good reception right now from inside. That's the word. You mentioned Jamie French earlier. This is one of the top handful of receivers in the country out of Jacksonville Mandarin that Sark and those guys went by to see. The issue there, CJ, that's really important. He was committed to Alabama, and he backed off of that, and he's wide open now. And a guy like that goes to the top of just about everybody's board. So let's see what happens. And it's not. I don't want to just talk about Kenny Baker because I do think he's going to be a plus recruiter from what I'm hearing, which will turn things around a little bit in that room. But my point of it is that they're just right now, the reception Texas is getting on the road is better than they've ever had it, period. And that's going to portend good things to come in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, Bobby. Well, I am going to let you take the lead on this here. We're bringing in Brett Wilkinson, and I'm going to let you explain a little bit about Brett as I bring him in.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we like to do, and Brett did this with us last year, if y'all are familiar with the Athletic Directors Cup rankings, Texas, I think, finished second in it last year after winning 2 years in a row. There's a guy out there named Brett Wilkinson. There's actually a couple that love to follow this and where Texas is vis-a-vis the rest of the country. Brett, welcome in. I'm going to let you explain exactly what you do as well. He's a diehard Longhorn fan as well. Go ahead, Brett.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. As Bobby was saying, every year Learfield awards the Directors Cup to the top athletic program in the country. This had been dominated by Stanford for 25 years in a row until Texas broke through under the lead of Chris Del Conte and won back-to-back Directors Cup championships. And last year it was a close finish, but they fell to Stanford and took second place. So one thing I noticed with the Directors Cup is there's not very many updates. They will post maybe 4 updates throughout the year. And to me, that's like watching a football game and getting a score update after the end of each quarter. That's not very exciting. As you can see in the graphic y'all are running here that I made, this is a dynamic contest that's running throughout the entire year. So what I wanted to do is provide updates after each championship so people could see how the Directors Cup was playing out in real time, so to speak. I also like to, when we get into the spring, start making some predictions about who might finish first, if Texas might have a chance to knock off Stanford or not. So it's a lot of fun, and it's just a way to get people more engaged with what I think is a pretty cool annual contest to name the best athletic department.
Yeah. So last year, Stanford win, Ohio State. Who ended up taking the title last year away from Texas?
So Stanford won. They got back on top after a 2-year hiatus. And really, like I said, they've been the dominant force in this space. They have a large athletic department. They have 31 sports that compete in NCAA championships. Texas, with the addition of beach volleyball, now has 21. So you can see the size discrepancy there. And the way the scoring system's set up, you take the scores from your 19 top programs, and of those 19, you must include volleyball, both basketball teams, and baseball. And with that scoring setup, it really favors Stanford, who has this really big athletic program. There's not much wiggle room for a school like Texas that only has 21 teams.
So we talked to Chris Del Conte. He's talking about adding sports in the coming years, in part because of Title IX. Right now, they need more women's sports. So we're going to be on the lookout for any number of different things. Right now, who's in the lead for the Directors Cup, and how does it look this year compared to last year? Women's volleyball winning again. There seem to be some other pieces that seem to lend to the idea that Texas might be able to recapture it this year.
Yeah, so the fall finished with actually UNC on top, North Carolina. North Carolina is really strong in the fall. They have some great programs. They will do well in the spring, but they typically fade a little bit because they don't have a lot of really good programs in the winter and spring. So I expect them to stay in the top 10, but I don't think they're going to stay on top. Stanford, as you can see, was right behind them, 1.5 points behind. So Stanford's right there as expected. And then Texas came in third place with 344 points. And you say third, that's good. We're Texas. We want to be up in the top 3. This is by far the best fall finish that Texas has ever had. Texas, and I went all the way back to when this started in 1993. Texas has never scored more than 300 points in the fall. Last year was the best fall Texas had ever had. They scored 298 points. Wow. So adding 46 points to that total is huge. Finishing in the top 3 in the fall is huge for a school like Texas that only competes in 5 sports in the fall. Stanford competes in 8 of the 8 sports in the fall. Stanford competes in all 8 of them. So again, you see that huge leg up that Stanford has, especially early on in the standings. So Texas really had a phenomenal fall. They outpaced themselves by 46 points, like I said, compared to last year.
So football obviously had a leg up from last year. That has to be one of them. Volleyball won the national championship. What were the other sports that played a role in that for Texas?
Yeah, football had the biggest points gained out of all the sports. So they did score 49 points last year. They finished 25th in the coaches poll, which was huge because they were actually unranked in the AP poll. But they did add 31 points by finishing 4th this year. So that was a huge gain. Volleyball, of course, they broke even, but they won the championship again. So you can't ask for more than that. And what was fun to watch in volleyball is they actually had an Elite 8 matchup against Stanford. So not only did they stop Stanford from scoring, 10 points in that game, but they also prevented them from scoring more and more points. And it also allowed Texas to get all the way to that 100-point mark for winning the championship. So that by itself was a huge swing. Women's soccer had their most successful season of all time, tied for their most successful season, I should say. They've been to the Sweet 16 a handful of times, and they were able to do that again this year behind, Lexi Misimo and Trinity Byers, who are just dynamos, and we're hoping for even better things next year.
Yeah, Brett, excuse me. Thanks for joining us this morning. I wanted to ask, how are these sports weighted? You mentioned 100 points for a national championship. Are they all on the same scale? Is there, does football outweigh anything? How does that work there?
Yep, that's a great question, CJ. So in the Directors Cup, all sports are scored exactly the same. Everything is on basically a 0 to 100 point scale, regardless of what the sport is. Now, your smaller sports and your smaller brackets, you get fewer points for your earlier successes, and you don't get to those bigger points until later. I mean, some of these brackets are 18 brackets, so much smaller than, a basketball bracket with 64 teams. So they do take that into account. But ultimately, if you win a championship, you're going to get 100 points regardless of the sport. Compared to the Capital One Cup that's put out, and I think sponsored by ESPN as well, they actually have a group. I think they call it Group A and Group B. The Group A sports, you get 3 times as many points. And so that's things like football, basketball, baseball, volleyball. And that cup is actually divided into men's and women's. So they have 2 different winners. And they also update their scores after each championship. So that's why I don't follow that one as closely. They basically do the work that I'm doing for the Directors Cup. They do it themselves.
Got it. Hey, Brett, we appreciate you joining us. What are the ones that we need to look out for this spring that will dictate whether or not you think Texas wins? Because if Stanford has so many more sports than Texas, only the top 20 count. Is that correct?
The top 19.
Top 19 sports count. So what are the ones that have to do well this spring for Texas to be in this conversation?
Yeah, well, all of them. and that's where Texas is at. And that's why Texas has done well at this in the past, but never as well as they've done recently. And really, I think when you hear CDC talk about the athletic programs, he wants every program competing for championships. And impressively, he's on the precipice of that being true. So one number to keep in mind is 75. We need Texas to score about 75 points in each of their sports to be competitive at the end of the day. Ones to keep a close watch on: men's basketball. It's a required sport. I know you were just talking about basketball. Texas actually moved up in the net rankings, even with their loss last night. So they're on the bubble. We really need Texas to get in to the tournament and score some points. Texas cannot afford to take a 0. So if they don't make the NCAA tournament, I think our chances are slim to none. Other than that, though, there's going to be a lot of top finishes coming for Texas. This is just how this athletic program performs. So the Texas Longhorns Twitter account is always posting the updated rankings. And I won't read the sports, but the rankings of the winter and spring sports that are out there right now are 2nd, 4th, 5th, 8th, 10th, 10th, 11th, 13th, and 16th. And then sports that aren't listed, the men's basketball team's not ranked. The outdoor track teams aren't ranked, but we know that they're going to do well. Beach volleyball, which who knows what that season's going to look like, and then rowing. So we know those other sports that aren't listed in those rankings, there's going to be some high-level success there too. So a lot of top 10 finishes still to come for Texas.
It certainly helps that Stanford's 10-9 in basketball too, I would bet.
What's that?
I said it certainly helps that Stanford's 10-9 in basketball, I would bet.
If Stanford's men's basketball could make the tournament consistently, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation because there would just be no chance.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Brett, for your time, buddy. You keep up the good work. We'll check in with you probably a couple months down the road when the race starts tightening up and some of the results start coming in as well.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Bobby.
Look, thanks for doing good work, man. Appreciate
it. Thanks, guys.
He does good work. Brett actually, whether people realize it or not, one of the guys that actually created this. I mean, and so it's fun to watch it. And he did it because out of his love for the University of Texas in part, as well as college athletics generally. We appreciate his time on Coffee and Football this morning.
Yeah, that was great.
And then real quick, I want to give his Twitter a shout out since he came on with us. You can go online and follow his updates. And that's where I pulled up some of those graphics from while he was talking. But direct_C updates on Twitter. And then that way you can keep up with the progress and Brett's work throughout the rest of the spring and summer. So
good stuff.
Some cupcakes.
Well, yeah, very good stuff for sure. A lot that's interesting too. Like the scoring and all that. I've always wondered that. That was a great question, CJ, because I was curious too. So, all right, y'all. Well, we got time for some more questions, and we are going to take some more. And I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Ronnie is anyway from Rosenberg. Bobby, CJ, in your opinion, who's the next commit?
Man, I don't know. Look, offensive linemen tend to commit early, right? But I don't know which offensive lineman is most on the cusp of making a decision right now. I do think Texas sits really well with Kelshawn Johnson, a young man out of Hitchcock, a wide receiver. But I don't know that he's ready to make a decision yet either. CJ, do you have a feel for that?
Kelshawn Johnson was the name I was going to mention. I was also going to say, we're kind of entering that kind of weird phase in the recruiting cycle right now where it's still very early. Kids are going to, in the next probably month and two, a little bit, maybe further on, they're going to start making that list for their official visits. And I know that's when really you'll start seeing the ball and dominoes start falling a little bit faster in the recruiting world. I was actually thinking too, Bobby, which positions do you see spots start going fast?
What about somebody like Ricky Stewart at Chapel Hill, the running back?
That's a good pick.
Because he was, he clearly likes Texas a lot. I'm interested to see what happens there.
Yeah.
And so, one of those things.
Absolutely. Committed to SMU at the moment as well. So you're going to have to see a little bit of movement there prior to any movement with Texas.
We're going to stay on the recruiting questions. Jesse Ullman says, CJ, Amari Irvin was just recently offered. He's listed as a running back. However, please tell me we're recruiting him as a linebacker. Do you have any information on this?
Well, it was Tashard Choice that offered him out of Atlanta. He's a 2027 prospect that plays both sides of the ball, obviously, running back, linebacker. Again, Tashard Choice was there, so there's a long time to continue his evaluation. The tape is exciting. I mean, there's a reason why so many people have him listed as both an athlete and a guy that plays running back and linebacker. I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer on which one he was offered at, but Tashard Choice being the one to offer him and kind of be in that vicinity of Atlanta, Georgia, gives me an indication that he's got an eye for talent and he likes having his running backs, scouted out pretty early. So that's kind of where I lean there. Bobby, have you heard anything on Amari Irvin, or is that a little too far out for you?
I don't know anything on Amari Irvin other than the offer at this point. That's not my game on this. I looked it up, and I just don't know him.
He's young. He's talented prospect. 2027, plays both sides. So we'll see which way his body grows and develops, because that also might be a little bit of a tipping point in terms of which and where the staff views him as a college athlete.
Well, the issue is it's just another Georgia guy. That's my biggest takeaway. They are not going slight in Georgia right now. They may end up throwing out 20, 25 offers in Georgia. That's my biggest takeaway of that, I guess. Across a number of classes, to your point, CJ.
Champ Bailey 3 says, do you have any new updates with Michael Fasusi? At the beginning, it looked like he was all Texas, but he's starting to flirt with out of state. What's the word on him?
Yeah, by my counts, his last visit to Texas was week 3 against Wyoming. So it's been a little bit of a stretch in between. That's something to monitor right now. I thought Texas got off to a very hot start for Fasusi. He reciprocated a lot of interest in Kyle Flood. I actually think after the Alabama game, he tweeted out a photo of Kyle Flood on FaceTime. So a lot of early interest. And as you mentioned, he's kind of been checking out other options. He was at Missouri on January 20th, the day that Texas hosted its big junior day on campus, with over 120 prospects coming down to the 40 acres. So Texas was unable to get FaceTime with him there, but I would expect to see a visit here in the spring, at least, by the end of spring football, if not earlier. He was very high on Texas early on. I know Texas liked him as well. a lot of in-state offensive linemen that are really starting to make headway as well on the national recruiting stage. So we'll monitor that one. But right now, I think it's him just doing his due diligence as a result of someone who has, close to 35, 40 offers.
Tom Rucker says, can we rest DeCorian Moore from LSU? And who are some of the priorities for the 2025 class?
Woo! I don't know about resting. That's going to be a tough one because right now LSU is on fire, guys. They've got the top running back, top wide receiver, and now the top quarterback in the recruiting class. Now they may also have one of the top cornerbacks as well. Jabari Antoine committed over the weekend too, out of Westgate. I don't know about that. I mean, they're going to give it, and see what happens. I feel like, if you're looking at it from me, I think priorities for the 2025 class are going to be defensive line. There'll be linebacker because there's so many good ones in this class, and then the secondary, and then probably high-end guys on offense. I mean, Texas is to a point now where they're recruiting a little bit differently. They're looking for difference makers, not just guys. And so they're going to take big swings and see what happens. So if I had to say a priority, I would put defensive line and particularly defensive tackle at the head of that list. But what I would do more than anything is put high-end prospects at the top of it because they're looking to swing big. So if a Jamie French, for example, is really available, they're looking for those kind of guys that are difference makers right now. They want, I mean, I know this sounds, they want a class full of Anthony Hills. They're not going to get a class, nobody does. But my point being, difference makers is what they're looking for right now. That's the priority.
Yeah. All right. And then we're going to go to this next question from Too Broke to Pay Attention. And he says, any news on the Slim Reaper and Booby Feaster after their junior day visits to Texas? Obviously, Slim Reaper is Savoy Nichols out of Waco. DJ?
Yeah. Oh, Savoy Nichols out of Waco. I was actually thinking Emmanuel Choice out of Lancaster, the 6'4" wide receiver as well. So a little clarity on both of those, I guess. Texas is still in the monitoring Savoy Nichols very closely there. He's been making his visits around the state. Emmanuel Choice was actually up at Oklahoma. It looks like the Sooners are going to be prioritizing him very hard. If you look at the on-field production Oklahoma's been getting from their wide receivers, they fit the size and mold of Emmanuel Choice a little bit closer than what Sarkisian's been deploying with his wide receivers down here in Austin. So a lot going on there. And then Booby Feaster, I actually got to talk to him a little bit prior to his visit. He said he's been down to Texas about 5 or 6 times now. And that's a 2027 wide receiver out of DeSoto. Has electrifying speed around 10.8, 10.7 verified. He said he hopes to get down to a 10.5 this upcoming spring as a true sophomore. So very encouraging there. I know Texas pitched to him being the next Julio Jones, is I think what you mentioned on the On Texas Football site, Blake. That right there should give you an indication of how the Texas staff views him and certainly sees him progressing in his development. He's about 6'1", 6'2" right now and can run that fast. A lot of excitement with Booby Feaster. I actually got to see his high school debut, believe it or not, at Allen this past fall. So a lot going on. He's going to be one of the most highly coveted prospects in the entire country for his class with that speed and size.
And then let's talk about transfers. Isaiah Stewart says, if key Michigan players were to hit the portal, what attrition do you think Texas could expect?
Wow. Well, now, do you expect, is he asking what attrition Texas could expect or Michigan could expect?
Well, he says
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to know there. I think if Michigan players were to hit the portal, Texas is, look, I mean, that's an opportunity. That's now, I don't think Texas is going to go whole hog on anybody or on anything, but they are going to look to add specific positions like defensive tackle, as they should. When Steve Sarkisian went into this offseason, he literally said, let's go after guys that make sense for us. We don't have a roster that needs overhauling like some people do in the portal. We need a roster that needs amplifying. And so I think that's where they're going to look at it. Defensive tackle is the one position where Texas doesn't have the numbers, though. I mean, like they have numbers, good enough numbers at other spots. They don't have the numbers there. I would add this. If they go after other elite players at Michigan, like a Will Johnson, there are guys that Michigan has that are top 10, top 15 draft picks. Colston Loveland, the tight end, is a top, maybe tight end number 1 in next year's NFL draft. They somehow go after him. I mean, you don't know what will happen, but we got to wait and see who goes in right now. I do think that Texas would love to see a defensive lineman or two go in from Michigan. I just don't know if it's going to happen, and they don't either right now.
Well, let's go to the other side of the coin. Bobby, you talked about defensive tackle being a little thin or, maybe being the biggest question mark. But King Me says, which position group will have the best 2 deep in 2024?
Quarterback.
That's a good answer.
Quarterback. I could see nickel if Makuba and Jahdae Barron are playing there. Potentially. But I don't know. Is Texas too deep anywhere, really, in your opinion, CJ, with NFL players other than quarterback? I mean, that's a fair question, right? You're muted, CJ.
Sorry, you said too deep with NFL talent.
Yeah, I mean, it's legitimately like. I know people are talking about a log jam at defensive end, but are those NFL players or are they just guys? I mean, is there a log jam anywhere with multiple NFL players? Maybe somewhere. Yeah, but that's not really, that's a little different. Blue and Baxter, that's a little different in that I think there's room for both guys to play.
That's what I was going to go with running back for the best 2 deep. Just because I think you'll see more impact out of them than what you will with Arch and Quinn. You look back at what Trey Wisner might be able to do. The 2 freshmen coming in. That to me is a pretty stacked, loaded room that I think can make a pretty impactful early impact on this team. Wide receiver was an interesting one, just in the sense of you're leaving off either 2 5-star guys or guys with 75 career catches on the field at any given play for the most part. Who are you keeping off of that field right now? That to me is also an interesting one as well.
Okay, guys. And I'm not going to make you name specific players here, but let's talk about position-wise. Miguel Gonzalez says, guys, who do y'all think the Horns could lose to the portal this spring? Again, not players, but what positions do you think we could see some attrition from here in a couple months?
I think it'd be safe to say you might look at the offensive line. That's a crowded room. They're up to about 13 guys on campus right now. You might be able to look at a running back potentially, maybe a guy who's been passed up at receiver. There's a lot of places where Texas has added a very talented crop over the last 4 months, really. And you can say, potentially a couple guys that have been passed up, maybe a defensive back as well. There's a lot of spots. Texas added a lot of talent in the portal and through the high school ranks. If this spring, you might see some guys getting passed up pretty quickly.
Bobby?
I think that I don't think the offensive line, I think there's like 17 or 18 total now, CJ, but a lot of those are young.
Yeah.
So I don't expect attrition there. Unless it's just guys that they may not fit the culture. I look at a guy like Jalen Gilbo, who with someone like Jahdae Barron coming back and Andrew Makuba coming in, where is his position in the future? What about Austin Jordan? They're getting up there in age and not necessarily breaking through, right? Juan Davis was close, but I think he's a good culture guy at Texas. The great thing about where Texas is, there's not a lot of fat to trim. A year ago, I could have told you that, these guys may need to move on because I don't see them ever having a place at Texas. That kind of, there may be 3 to 4 of those guys on the roster now, or 4 to 5, as opposed to 15 to 20 a year ago. That's the difference, and why Texas, I think, is fundamentally better off than they were a year ago.
All right, Bobby, before we move on to the next subject, why don't you tell folks out there about Texas electricity ratings?
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone shopping for electricity in the deregulated areas of Texas, like Houston and Dallas, TexasElectricityRatings.com is the best place to find a great electricity plan for your household. For starters, it filters out the dangerous and gimmicky plans from providers that are all hat and no cattle when it comes to your monthly bill. You can shop by rate, but also by an average bill feature that actually takes into account seasonal usage to give you a real number and not some placeholder. So if you're looking for a new electricity plan or just want to shop around, check out TexasElectricityRatings.com/OTF for the best options available. And they say hook 'em to all the Longhorn fans out there.
And we want to thank them for sponsoring each and every Tuesday morning right here on Coffee and Football. And let's talk about the NFL draft. King Me says, which Longhorn gets drafted first? And could you see him going to Houston or Dallas? And there was an NFL draft put out the other day where the Houston Texans selected Byron Murphy with their first pick. But Yahoo Sports, they put out their first 2-round draft yesterday, and I'm going to bring that up here, fellas. We'll kind of go through it. They have 5 Longhorns taken in the first 2 rounds. However, they said no Longhorns in the first round, and they started it off with the Chargers taking Byron Murphy in the second round, followed by the very next pick, Adonai Mitchell going to the Titans, and then Xavier Worthy going to the Eagles, followed by Jatavion Sanders going to the Dolphins. And last but not least, Jonathan Brooks going to the Dallas Cowboys. So my question to you guys, number one, do you think it is the second round before we see a Longhorn drafted? And what do y'all think about some of these picks? I mean, Worthy in the Eagles offense, Sanders in the Dolphins offense.
How about this? How about the fact that Tavondre Sweat isn't one of the top 5 Longhorns picks?
Yeah. That's another thing.
Winner. Brooks going as high as the second round, coming off an ACL injury. I don't know that that's going to happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope to be wrong. But I don't see that happening. I think Tavondre Sweat's going to be too valuable in the second round, particularly late in the second round for when big time teams that are in the playoffs start looking to where they need to get better next year. A lot of them are going to look on the interior defensive line. I mean, I guarantee you could go back and look at it. They'll start drafting interior linemen in the second and third rounds, the elite teams. And they do it because there's not much left that's going to change them on the outside or in the offensive skill game. That's their thinking. So I having followed the draft a little bit, there's a lot of interior linemen that go second, third, fourth round.
No. Do you think Murphy or Sweat first? I mean, a lot of mocks now are just so high on Murphy. We've seen, countless ones really over the past few weeks. Some people even saying that he could be a top 10, 12, even 15 pick. Do you think he's the first horn taken?
I think that he's likely the first horn taken at this point, given what I'm reading. The one thing about Byron Murphy is you know what you get with Byron Murphy. Tavondre Sweat, I don't want to call him a one-hit wonder, but he did just kind of turn it on at the end here, right? Now, when he turned it on, it was a little special. Murphy has been consistent from day one at Texas. And so if you're going to invest that kind of money at a high-level pick, you're going to want to know a lot of teams are going to want to know exactly what they get. Some are willing to take more risk than others. But I feel like he is probably the biggest can't miss prospect in this group of Texas players. I think Christian Jones is a can't miss guy, but I think he's a 4th or 5th round pick. Like there's a lot of wiggle room with where you might pick Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, and JT Sanders. And even Jonathan Brooks because of the injury. It's hard for me to say whether some of those guys are late first round or mid second round. I just think there's a big gap there. But Murphy, I think, is going to be a solid NFL player for a long time. I actually think Tavondre Sweat will be too. based on where he's going right now. He's on the right path. I would be willing to take a chance on him. Mitchell, Worthy, and Sanders, they're kind of weird ads because they don't have ideal. Mitchell doesn't have that great speed on the outside, right? And Worthy does, but he's not necessarily a competitive ball catcher. And then you worry about Brooks's injury, and Sanders. Is he good enough to block and create, space for himself on offense? Look, it's a tremendous draft class for Texas, though. I mean, 5 guys overall going into the first 2 rounds. Sign me up for that every year. Because Steve Sarkisian will end up recruiting extremely well off of that, in my opinion. Extremely well.
Go ahead, CJ. Are you about to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the first 2 rounds right now, and there's a lot of destinations that make a lot of sense for these guys in terms of where they might fall and where they might get picked. I think Byron Murphy ends up going first, but towards the end of that first round, like I could see someone like the Buffalo Bills taking, AD Mitchell. They won't have Gabe Davis this year. He's headed out to free agency to complement Stephon Diggs. That's kind of the same mold. They have a 6'2" wide receiver that not necessarily will burn you deep, but is a good deep threat. Good possession guy. I think if the Chiefs are back there in the second round, they might go get a guy like Xavier Worthy because that's been the type of mold at receiver that they've wanted. Obviously, Tyreek Hill made all the splash plays, but you go out and you look at McCole Hardman as well. Xavier Worthy fits that mold. I think for the Cowboys, if you're drafting out of true necessity, which I think is what gets GMs fired more times than taking the best player available out of necessity, you're looking at the defensive line saying, yeah, we need a guy that can stop the run immediately. That might be T'Vondre Sweat. Or you flip around to the other side of the ball and you say, hey, we need a running back because we thought Tony Pollard was going to be the guy. He had a good year, but he wasn't, a franchise guy that you want to lock up for a long time. Jonathan Brooks could be that guy. So a lot going on. I think that second round is going to be very busy. And I would be a little bit surprised to not hear T'Vondre Sweat's name called by round 3. But, that's kind of the way things are trending, it looks like. I'm hoping a big week at the Senior Bowl is actually able to elevate his draft stock a little bit as well into that true round 2 kind of category.
CJ, T'Vondre Sweat, the problem with him is he's not a 3-down player.
Right.
Is that what people are kind of labeling him as right now?
Yeah, I think the NFL's a different beast because at 360 pounds, you don't normally see that kind of impact in pass rushing, the interior approach there. You have your one-offs like you have Ndamukong Suh, who was obviously should have won the Heisman. You got guys like Vita Vea, who's able to be impactful up there. There were times this year where T'Vondre Sweat was very impactful in the passing game. We can point to it, the Kansas State game specifically, in which what he was able to do in pass rushing saved games for Texas. But you're not going to see that on a consistent basis, which is what the NFL values. And so I think if you're looking at a 3-down interior defensive lineman, if you're not providing that, you're not able to do that, your stock's going to fall a little bit. And I think that's why we're seeing the stock roar so much for Byron Murphy on the flip side.
Got it.
Also, Pro Football Network, they put out their top 5 defensive tackles from the Senior Bowl, or who they're projecting, I guess, to be the top 5, and both Murphy and Sweat were 1 and 2 on that list. So some high hopes for the Longhorn duo. All right, well, let's take some more questions here. We got a little bit more time before we got to get out of here, guys. And CJ, this is a question for you from Mike D. He says, because you like the Kansas City and Ravens game, did you like the Miami Hurricanes back in the day from the documentary? I know you're not born then, but did you like them?
Yeah, I was 4 years old when they were winning. I was alive. But in that widely regarded as the greatest team of all time, those Miami teams from 2000 to 2001.
The most talented. I don't know if they were the best teams is my problem with them. Okay. Ken Dorsey was not an elite quarterback. And so the best teams, I think, are the ones that have great quarterbacks with great talent around them. And they lost in part because they didn't have a great quarterback against Ohio State in 01.
We're in the true off season.
They were talented. That ridiculous. There were some 90s teams and 80s teams, and even the last run really of Larry Coker. There were teams that Miami had that, had multiple Hall of Famers in them. I mean, multiple Hall of Famers. So
the 01 team went undefeated, Bobby.
Is it the 01 or the which one?
The year before. Yeah, when they got screwed on the call, it was the year before, I believe. The 01 team, I think they were 12-0, but I don't remember how many draft picks were on. I mean, it was absurd, man. Absurd.
But they still didn't have the quarterback. Like that's my piece on those greatest teams of all time. You got to have a quarterback, or else you're not really fair.
We're in the true offseason, Bobby, when we're in this greatest team of all time conversation.
Yeah.
For me, like the last 10 years, the best team was 2019 LSU. I thought what they were able to do from that offense, there was no one ever coming close to that.
Second half of the season, you're correct. First half of the season, they didn't know who they were yet.
Yeah.
That's why Texas almost got them in DKR.
Yeah.
They didn't know who they were yet. Joe Burrow was just figuring out how good he was, I think. But the second half of the season on, they were phenomenal. You're right.
Absolutely.
I mean, they made Nick Saban look like deli meat. I mean, they chopped him up and sliced him and diced him like nobody's business.
I mean, we don't even have to get into what they did to Oklahoma.
Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase,
Terrace Marshall.
Oh man,
first round running back. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean Joe Burrow himself. Those are guys. They had an offense that I will say this too. Like throwing the ball is different than maybe what Texas was in 05, right? Texas was a little bit of both. It was a lot of vents and a lot of throwing and running. They focused almost 100% on. They had some runs, etc., but they were a throwing team, and so that was what was interesting about. It's almost like that's how they were the best version of the 2010s. I think Texas was the best version of the aughts, 2005. Personally,
over those Tebow Gator teams.
God, yes.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Tebow was exactly what we thought he was. I mean,
I'm not a Tebow guy.
I mean, he was not a great quarterback.
I'm a devil's advocate guy.
Yeah, no, he was not a great quarterback. The ones that I would be more concerned with are 04
USC.
04 USC.
Hey, that 2001 Miami team, 38 draft picks. They beat 5 top 15 teams and scored on average 42 points and only allowed 9.
No,
that's phenomenal.
They had guys now. I mean, I'm just telling you, they were the most talented team. You can't tell me.
I get what you're saying.
You can't tell me the best team of a decade had Ken Dorsey at quarterback, or Tim Tebow at quarterback.
Yeah. Interesting discussion for sure. Well, we got a super chat we got to jump over to from Juan, guys. Thank you, Juan, for the big super chat. He says, Bobby, do you think Rodney Terry's hire was an optics hire? They didn't go after Scott Drew or Kelvin Sampson, or do you think he's the right hire instead of getting a big name coach like Billy Donovan or Danny Hurley from UConn?
Well, I do. I think it's fair to say that it was an optics hire at some level, not completely though. I mean, don't diminish what Rodney Terry did. I mean, he took that team to the Elite Eight, and frankly, if Sir Jabari Rice isn't injured and Dylan Disu isn't injured, they're probably in the Final Four last year. So don't whatever you do, don't diminish what Rodney Terry did, even if it was partially an optics hire from, he's doing well at Texas, you need to hire the man, right? I think that the jury will be out until Rodney Terry proves everybody wrong. And I think that's the way it should be at Texas. I like Rodney Terry personally, for sure. I think he's a big-time guy. My point here is that I'm interested in long-term what he's going to build and how he's going to build it. Right now, you can't wait until mid-season to figure out who your best starting 5 is and how you want to play. That would be my critique of this team so far this year. The only one that I think is really valuable or valid.
Thank you, Juan, for the super chat. We definitely appreciate it. All right, guys, this is going to be the last question for today. VFL TexX says, Texas SEC champions the first year in their new conference. Do you think it's possible?
Possible, yes, but I think Georgia goes in as heavy favorites, guys, right?
Yeah. Man, how big is that game?
What's that?
Georgia, I said, how big is that Georgia-Texas game mid-season?
I still can't believe SEC is going to learn that you can't just schedule stuff at Austin certain times. You have to kind of figure it out. It's the same time as that F1 stuff that comes to Austin every year. The hotel room prices right now for Texas, Georgia are in the $800 and $900 a night range downtown. I mean, you just can't. That because it's the same weekend, and F1 requires you to have a 4-day pass, a 4-day hotel reservation. So, I mean, Bastrop, a lot of people going to be at the Holiday Inn or Hampton in Bastrop for that one. I think if you're coming from out of town,
I wish I owned some Airbnbs.
Look, I'm just joking a little bit, but the reality of it is that's going to be a huge game. I think Georgia has to be the favorite. Beyond that, there's going to be a lot of good teams in the SEC. I wonder if Texas, if they get the right people, can be also a great team next year. That's the question I have.
Yeah. I was looking at those hotel prices like they were all ready for the SEC championship game, and that game might actually end up being what decides, kind of the top or the upper tier of that SEC conference. It's looking like it's going to be the biggest game that we'll see from an SEC slate this year, maybe even in the country.
Yep.
All right, Bobby. Well, you got anything that of note coming up later today right here on Texas Football?
Yeah, absolutely. CJ and I are going to do a recruiting breakdown. We're going to try to go over a lot of these offers and kind of go a little bit deeper. We had some good recruiting questions today on Coffee and Football about prioritization that I want to hit a little bit harder on and maybe go over some of the top-end guys that Texas is really recruiting at each position and also talk about some of the guys they've offered. So I'm going to try to – I want to pinpoint that and really get in deep with CJ on that. And then obviously tonight, Tuesday night, Rod Babers, CJ, as well as Aaron Hogan have our weekly live stream at 7 o'clock tonight. Rod, CJ, and Aaron Hogan. And then tomorrow we've got more of the same. Keep up with us on TexasFootball.com as well. Click on the community thread and please join us in the community. Feel free to ask questions, talk Texas football or Texas sports, etc. I also want to say thank you to Brett Wilkinson for joining us today. I thought he was very interesting about the Directors' Cup standings.
For sure. And then be sure to go check his Twitter out as well so you can keep up to date with that. And then as Bobby said, head on over to ontexasfootball.com. If you haven't already as well, please hit that like and subscribe button. We would definitely appreciate that. And for Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Welcome.